Imagine this. Trade politics have become so cutthroat that something as basic as an electrical switch, something we've always taken for granted, could be at risk of being turned off at any moment. This isn't a movie plot. It's the reality unfolding between the US and Canada in the spring of 2025. On March 4, 2025, President Donald Trump officially imposed a 25% tariff on nearly all imports from Canada except energy. However, energy products like oil and minerals weren't entirely exempt, with Washington adding an additional 10% special tariff on these items. In response, just days later, on March 10 and 11, 2025, Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced a 25% surcharge, about 7 per megawatt hour, on all electricity exports to the U.S., specifically targeting the northern states of Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. This move was clearly a retaliation against Washington's tough trade policy. Ontario's government estimated that the tariff would generate around $208,000 to $277,000 in revenue per day, while directly affecting about 1.5 million households and businesses in the U.S. dependent on imported Canadian electricity. In states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, residents quickly felt the impact of Ontario's electricity tariff through sharply rising monthly bills. Each household had to pay an additional $100 per month for electricity, leading to cumulative losses of up to $400,000 per day across the region. In the industrial sector, steel plants faced difficulties as operating costs soared, risking production disruptions. However, no major shutdowns have been reported so far, partly due to timely supplies from domestic natural gas sources. Meanwhile, electricity-intensive businesses like data centers, semiconductor plants, and cold storage facilities requiring stable 24/7 power had to switch to expensive diesel generators. While a temporary solution, this came with significant delays in the supply chain, particularly in industries requiring tight temperature control and energy stability. Doug Ford didn't stop at imposing the electricity tariff. In a stern statement, he warned that Ontario could halt electricity exports to the U.S. entirely if Washington continued to escalate trade tensions. By the end of March, Ontario temporarily delayed the tariff's enforcement to allow for further negotiations, but Ford's message was crystal clear. "I can take away your lifeblood if you don't restrain yourselves." This warning wasn't just a political threat, but a stark reminder that the seemingly invisible power of energy was becoming a strategic leverage in a brutal economic standoff. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, the electricity the U.S. imports from Canada accounts for about 0.3% of the national electricity demand. However, in states with high imports like New York or the New England region, this percentage can rise to 5 to 10% during peak winter periods. At one point, New England recorded Canadian electricity imports accounting for 18% of the total load over 10 consecutive days, even peaking at 21% in an intraday record. Still, on average, the U.S. electricity import rate is relatively low. Therefore, the U.S. power grid can manage by shifting to alternative sources like natural gas or oil, albeit more expensive ones. This would significantly increase costs, but not immediately paralyze the system. The U.S. power grid is currently organized into 3 main separate regions: the Eastern Interconnection, the Western Interconnection, and the independent Texas ERCOT system. These grids are not fully synchronized, making cross-support during emergencies incredibly complicated and costly. A 2023 report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, raised a serious warning. Around 70% of major transmission lines and transformers across the U.S. have been in operation for more than 25 years, with some devices operating for 40-60 years, designed with Cold War-era technology. These are now under pressure from modern challenges like cyber attacks, extreme weather, and geopolitical volatility. If a key substation loses power, the domino effect, a chain reaction causing the collapse of a regional grid, is a real threat, potentially resulting in widespread outages with severe economic consequences. In states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, residents quickly felt the impact of Ontario's electricity tariff through sharply rising monthly bills. Each household had to pay an additional $100 per month for electricity, leading to cumulative losses of up to $400,000 per day across the region. In the industrial sector, steel plants faced difficulties as operating costs soared, risking production disruptions. However, no major shutdowns have been reported so far, partly due to timely supplies from domestic natural gas sources. Meanwhile, electricity-intensive businesses like data centers, semiconductor plants, and cold storage facilities requiring stable 24/7 power had to switch to expensive diesel generators. While a temporary solution, this came with significant delays in the supply chain, particularly in industries requiring tight temperature control and energy stability. After Mark Carney took office as Canada's Prime Minister in March 2025, the new government quickly established a strategic direction, sharply reduce economic dependence on the U.S., and boost the role of clean energy exports to major markets in Europe and Asia. Under federal coordination, provinces with significant hydroelectric potential, like Quebec and British Columbia, began aggressively pursuing clean energy contracts with strategic partners like Vietnam, Indonesia, and South Korea. These agreements not only strengthened Canada's position as a global energy partner, but also projected the image of a stable, sustainable, and politically risk-free energy supplier, particularly attractive in today's unpredictable global landscape. The clearest result was the shift in investment flows toward Canada. A major German car manufacturer, which had planned to expand its factory in South Carolina, U.S., decided to temporarily halt the project and seriously consider Ontario instead, attracted by the promise of cheap, clean, stable electricity and a more transparent political environment. This is a clear sign of a global capital shift toward energy security and policy reliability. If Ontario moves further and halts electricity exports entirely to the U.S., the northeastern U.S. states will face a surge in electricity prices. While the direct dependence on Canadian electricity in states like Michigan is relatively low, below 0.5% according to official statistics, the ripple effects from this disruption could spread through the supply chain. The Michigan Public Service Commission has warned that this disconnect could severely affect the reliability of the regional grid, especially during high-demand periods like summer or winter. In such a scenario, with Canadian imports cut off, the U.S. energy system would have to revert to fossil fuels like natural gas and diesel. While this is a temporary solution, it directly contradicts the country's climate goals, not only raising CO2 emissions but also spiking air pollution in industrial and urban areas. This situation places the U.S. in a tough spot. Either continue to uphold tough trade policies or face the consequences in energy, the environment, and global credibility in green transition commitments. The biggest danger in the current energy trade crisis isn't just the risk of blackouts, but a deeper level, the collapse of trust in the stability and reliability of the U.S. market. To global investors, the U.S. was once seen as the ultimate safe haven, a place with a transparent legal system, abundant energy, and a stable investment environment. But as they witness a superpower caught between America first political declarations and internal flaws like deteriorating infrastructure, energy dependency, and inconsistent policy responses, that trust is beginning to erode. Many investors have already begun shifting their portfolios and plans to Canada, which is seen as offering clearer energy policies, stronger sustainability commitments, and lower political risk. If the trade war drags on, the consequences won't stop at rising costs. They could lead to the partial collapse of the USMCA agreement and fracture the North American trade order that has been carefully built over decades. Businesses will be forced to adjust global supply chains, reallocate capital, and reassess the strategic position of the U.S. in a shifting geopolitical and energy world. Canada is gradually transforming from a country dependent on the U.S. market into a global energy hub with ambitious goals. With abundant, clean, and stable hydroelectric resources, along with proactive foreign trade policies, Canada has significantly expanded its energy export networks to Asia and the European Union, regions with high demand and strong commitments to green transition. Meanwhile, if the U.S. doesn't find a timely and comprehensive solution to its trade policy instability, outdated grid infrastructure, and fossil fuel dependency, it will face a severe weakening of its ability to attract long-term investment.